Hello folks, Dorathor here with yet another look at the TGT expansion. This time we'll be taking a look at the Shaman class and how you can build Shaman decks that work both great in ladder but also are quite fun to play. All of these decks I've been playing the past few days and I found Shaman to be actually pretty strong in some areas but still lacking in others. Before, when the cards were released, a lot of people hyped the Shaman class thinking that it would become really broken as a result of some of the cards that they have gotten, especially cards like Totem Golem and Tuskar Totemic were really popular, but also in the later stages people were hyping Thunderbluff Valiant. Well, those cards definitely help Shaman, but a lot of the issues that Shaman had before are still existing in these current decks, but definitely they have gotten a much stronger early game, and more minions that actually do stuff are always welcomed. So first off, we'll take a look at the mid-range Shaman deck, which a lot of people have been experimenting with, and I myself am no different. So the deck builds around two things. It builds around the new cards, the Totem Golem and the Tuskar Totemic, but also cards that were previously seemed to be not good enough, like the Fireguard Destroyer, which I have been using a lot lately. I think the Fireguard Destroyer is sort of a controversial choice, but I feel like overall it's doing its job and it's also really strong once you're ahead on board. If you can drop the Fireguard Destroyer once you already have at least one other minion on the board, they will have to deal with a lot, and the extra stats can be really hard to deal with unless you're playing against like a Hunter with Freezing Trap or something like that. And of course it buffs itself, so if you get a 6/6 for 4 mana, it's really insane. 7/6 can sometimes be tricky because you can get hit by a big game Hunter, but most of the time you're gonna be fine no matter what you hit unless it's the 7. And if they don't have a big game Hunter, 7 damage isn't too bad actually. So just going down the deck from the top, Rock Biter Weapon, really important. Crackle, I think one Crackle is okay. I've toyed around with playing a bit more spells, a bit fewer minions, but I feel like the consistency of the deck really grows once you play a lot of minions. And I really want to play around the two curves, that is 2 and 4, where on the 2 mana you need to play the Totem Golem. If you play Totem Golem, you have 2 mana again next turn. So that's why you need a lot of 2-drops in order to keep the pressure going once you get the Totem Golem down. And if you don't get a Totem Golem, well, Tuskar Totemic is really good, especially if you have something like Haunted Creeper already out on board, or perhaps a Nerubian Egg, and you can get some totems to protect it, trade it out later. So I have a lot of 2-drops, or well, a lot. I have 3 2-drops, or 6, and overall, if you don't have another 2-drop, your hero power is always okay. It's not really what you want to be doing, since you want to get a lot of pressure early game. You want to do as much damage as you can, but hero power is okay. So going down, I have the 2 Hexes. I feel like Hex is really good right now. It takes all of the Death Rattle minions, and it takes a lot of the high drops that people are starting to play, especially since the new expansion has brought a lot of interesting cards. I feel like Hex locks down a lot of those, and it's never really a bad card. It's just the difference between being okay and being good. So at least it can 1-for-1 pretty much anything in the game, so it's pretty good. 1 Lightning Storm, because I felt like I wanted to have the 1 comeback card, and sometimes Lightning Storm isn't all that great, but sometimes it can also save you the game if the opponent is just trying to race you, and in race situations Lightning Storm is great. The Mana Tide Totem is also kind of a controversial choice, but I really like it because it's really good against control decks, and it's good once you have established a board in order to keep drawing those value cards and gaining the grinding out the value. And it's also a totem, so it gets buffed with the Thunderbluff Valiant, which we'll come to in a second. So the other big curve is the 4-drops. The Fireguard Destroyer overloads you for 1 mana, so you can play a 4-drop 2 turns in a row. Defender is way too good not to play. Defender on the Nerubian Egg is great, and overall Defender on pretty much anything. Like you can play turn 3 Tuskar, getting a totem out, and you have 2 targets for Defender if none of them die, so it's pretty good. And then for the 4-drops, for the 5-drops, we're keeping it kind of low this time. I know a lot of people like to play Azure Drake. Azure Drake is a great card, but I feel like Sludge Belcher is just better, especially if in more aggressive metas. And the other purpose of the Sludge Belcher is also to protect all of your totems that you'll constantly try to keep on the board in order to make Thunder Bluff Valiant really good. And the Fire Elemental, of course, one of the best cards in Shaman. And to finish it off, we have the Alakir. It feels like Alakir is... I feel like you almost have to play either Alakir or the... what's called the Doomhammer to have enough reach to actually win the game. And I feel like for this deck, Alakir is a little bit better. And also, Alakir is a taunt if you need it in a clutch situation. And it can deal a lot of damage with the Rock Biters and the Flame Tongues as well. So that's it for the mid-range deck. Mid-range deck. I feel like this deck is the most consistent one, and the one deck that most people have actually been trying out right now. But the next two decks are kind of interesting in their own ways. And while this deck is going for more consistency, it still has issues with the same things that Shaman has issues with before. If you don't have a good curve, you can lose pretty much every deck, and it's sometimes really weak against board clear decks, which is also why the Ruby and Egg I feel like is an important addition. As well as you have the, I think, 6 activators from the Ruby and Egg. So yeah. The next up, we have the mech aggro deck. So a lot of people have been building Shaman mechs for the past few metas, and I think mech Shaman is always gonna be there to some extent, just because of cards like Power Maze, way too good, and the burst potential of Shaman. But I feel like the previous mech decks are way too spell heavy focused, and while that may save you some games you will just lose because you don't draw the minions early that you need to. So this is why I feel like if you add a bit of the totem engine to the already early game focused mech Shaman, you can have the totem golem, you can have the either the Tuskar if you want to, or just the general other cards. I feel like you can really do a lot of damage with the mechs early game. The mechs in general snowball really hard if you get the mech warper. And the Power Maze is really good for controlling the board. So this is pretty much, well, I'd say this looks a little bit like my previous list, but it's a bit more early curved, and it finishes up with the double Doomhammer, which you really want to draw in this deck and play it on turn 5, because if you have an early curve that's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and on turn 5 you get to play the Doomhammer, you really get to finish out the game pretty fast. And again, we have the Fireguard Destroyer. I just feel like that card's been testing really good, but I did consider removing the double Fireguard Destroyer and adding 2 Tuskar Totemic. It's sort of a hard choice to make because the Tuskar has a really big upside. If you get any one of the good totems, it's really great, especially in a deck like Mech Aggro, where usually you're gonna have a 2-drop. Most of the time you're gonna have something to play on the early turns, and if you can have early pressure, Tuskar is always good, because Tuskar is a card that snowballs really well, especially if you get something like a Manatide, or even a Flame Tongue, or just another Totem Golem. It's just insane. So yeah, you can consider adding the Tuskar instead of the Fireguard, but for now I'm gonna stick to the Fireguard, but I guess a little bit more testing might do wonder. And the reason why I don't play the, what's it called? Felguard. The reason why I don't play the Felguard, the 8 mana 5/5 mech, is because I simply don't think it's good enough. It's a bit too slow for what I'm trying to do with this deck. For this deck, I really want to get on the pressure early, and I want to burst down the opponent by at least turn 7, around turn 7, 8. Sort of like that. So yeah, this deck is a little bit more early curved. It still has a hard time against other really aggressive decks like Aggro Hunter and Zoo if they get a good curve, but it works really well against some control decks, and it has a lot of burst to finish off through taunts. So something like Druid really struggles against this deck. Okay, so the last one that I want to present to you today is the Malaga Shaman deck. This is a deck I have been playing not that much myself, but I have some teammates who play this deck quite a lot in the last meta, and I wanted to give my view of how the deck could look after TGT, because there was quite a lot of powerful cards released for this deck. So I have a bit of inspiration for this deck from Savitz, who made a deck list with Malagas, but I have a few key differences. Most notably, I really like to play the Mana Tide totems, even though it's a minion and minions kind of go against the purpose of the deck where you want to play out the Ancestor's Call. I feel like you can play Mana Tide totem whenever you want to. Like there's never really a time where you can't just pop down a mana totem if you have 3 mana. Where cards like Zombie Chow, there's sometimes where you actually would rather it stay in the hand because you don't want to heal your opponent, because you want to burst them like in 1 or 2 turns. So Zombie Chows can be really hard to put down sometimes if you don't draw it on turn 1. That's definitely a card that has been seen in this deck and is really good against aggro, but again, I feel like the downside of Zombie Chow is too big. Then there is the Elemental Destruction, which is the card that got released in TGT, which is really insane. It's basically a 3 mana Flame Strike that you can, or a Flame Strike that you can use on 3 mana, and of course it takes your entire next turn. But sometimes you get around with cards like Lava Shock, or sometimes you don't really need to do anything on the next turn. Or you can take the Overload on turn 10 after the board clear, and it won't really matter that much. Just pop down a Mana Tide and a Totem. So it really depends on the board state and how the like how your opponent plays. If they try to push the board, you can really punish them. And most people aren't expecting or playing around Elemental Destruction. It's just really a great board clear. And of course you have the Healing Wave, which also got released. I feel like Healing Wave is an iffy card. It does heal you a lot, but I feel like it's been worse than I expected it to be. I thought most of the time Healing Wave would really like wreck aggro decks. But turns out that just healing yourself, even though it's 14 healing, it's not actually that good. But for specifically Malaga Shaman, it can be life-saving, especially if it can just give you 1 more turn in some situations. It's really good. And most of the time you're gonna get either one of your Emperor or Malagas on Healing Wave, so that's gonna be really insane. Of course, I have the 1 Refreshment Vendor, which is kind of like a testing card. But so far it's been testing really good. If you pop it down on turn 4 and just heal yourself, the heal is good enough, and the body is really good for mopping up early game minions. So it's sort of like a spell. Again, it has a downside of being a minion, but it's kind of, if it has sort of the same properties as the Zombie Chow, but of course it heals yourself as well, and heals can sometimes save your life, even though it's only the little amount that Refreshment Vendor gets you. But overall I think it's okay. Might consider playing a different card instead of Refreshment Vendor, but right now I'm not really sure what it could be. Perhaps a second Lava Burst, but again that's up for debate. Then of course you got the Azure Drakes. The Taurus and Malagas are sort of the combo of the deck. You need to have them. For the people who don't know how this deck plays, most of the time you stall until you have the Emperor and Malagas on hand. You pop down the Emperor, reduce your entire hand by 1, and either you get out Malagas and burst with some of your spells, or you play Ancestor's Call, which gets out the Malagas for 4 mana, and then you play your spells, which can most of the time deal way over 20 damage, especially if you have timed it. If you have like 2 lightning bolts, like 1 lightning bolt, Malagas gives like 5 spell power, so lightning bolts gives 8 damage. And then you have the Lava Burst, which gives like 10 damage, and so on and so on. So it's sort of like a late game Shaman deck, where early game you use your spells to control the board. And you just like you're not concerned about dealing damage in early game, but any point of damage you can actually get in with cards like Refreshment Vendor, Azure Drakes and such is usually pretty good. But yeah, most of the time you just want to stall out to late game and then burst them from 30 health in 1 or 2 turns with all of your spells. And most of the time it actually works out pretty great unless you're against something like a warrior. Warriors can be really hard for decks like this. It's sort of the same as Freeze Mage, where you don't have an infinite amount of reach. You have a really strict number of damage you can deal in a game. Because you don't deal it with minions, you deal it with spells, and all spells are, well, once you use them, you can't use them again. So in that way, it has a finite amount of damage, and that can sometimes struggle against decks like Warrior or other decks that have a lot of heals. But it's really good at controlling the board early, and it's really good against, I feel like, mid-range decks, because your spells are really hard for some decks to do. Like Hex can really fuck up a Druid. Sometimes early game decks, if they're not too aggro, if they're like mid-range Hunter, I feel like you can do pretty well. But if it's really face decks, it's hard to say. Healing Wave can do a lot, but I think it's really draw dependent. But I definitely think you have a chance against really aggro decks, just because you can stabilize with spells and then heal yourself up for 14. If you can get the Joust Healing Wave off, it's really, really good. So yeah, I think that's the 3 decks. So if I should say which deck you should go out to play, I'd definitely say, if you have the cards, test out the Malagas deck. It's really fun to play. If you just want to climb the ladder ranks right now, I feel like perhaps the mid-range Shaman deck is the best one. It might have some issues against some of the meta, specifically Hunter. I feel like sometimes can be hard, especially the secrets can be hard to deal with, because many of your biggest minions give you overload, and once you play a minion that gives you overload which just gets freezing trapped, it can be really hard to come back into the game, because you spend more mana, because you lose mana on the next turn on basically just having a minion that can't do shit. But I feel like mid-range Shaman overall is the most consistent one, and for ladder you should go for consistency. But definitely feel like the Malagas and the mech decks have their own matchups which they are really good in, so definitely try them out as well. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comment section, like the video, and tell your friends about it. I'll be doing another class in a few days. I tried to get out online classes as soon as possible, but of course it's gonna take a while between every video. I have other stuff going on as well. But definitely, if you like it, check out the rest of the channel, check out our podcast, and check out the Druid video I did, I think, a few days ago as well.